We're here today to go through the new components that have been included in the FCSUA community related to FPCTP grants. We are going to be talking about the quarterly reports, which include the invoices and the summary of activities. To do this, you should have a license to log into the FCSUA community. To log in, you should go to fcsua.force.com. Again, it's fcsua.force.com. If you don't have a license and you need to work in any of these two parts of the quarterly report, our advice is that you coordinate with your program director, with your program coordinator to decide how to manage the licenses that you already have. And if you're not using some, please let us know and we will be happy to assign the license to you. Also, the assignment process is very simple. So it's just for this license assignments needs to change. Please same, just reach out to us and we will change the licenses to the person that needs to work at on this report at the moment, and then we can assign it back to someone else. So that is not a problem at all. Let's go ahead and start because this is all related to grants. You're going to navigate into the FPCTP grants tab. So the FPCTP grants tab actually now includes more components than before. We have the quarterly reports, the annual and final performance report, and modifications and adjustments. Before it was only the grant proposals in here, but they has grown so much to include every piece that needs to be related, or it's related to reporting um, connected to the FPCTP grant proposals. At this moment, we're going to talk about the quarterly reports, but we're going to have other recordings about modifications and adjustments in annual and final performance report coming soon. So the quarterly reports is the second tab. If you can see, I have four records in here already. I'm using a demo setup that I have for this. In my case, my grant proposal, the one that I created for this demo, goes, and let's double check that very quickly. It goes from 2024 to 2026. So I already have in here the first year of reporting. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because once you logged in to do your reporting, to work on your reporting for the first time, you are going to see at least one quarterly report in there. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is because you um, needed the previous information in the system, the previous expenses that you had up to the point of this moment when you are going to start entering information related to quarter three. So at least you're going to see one record under the quarterly reports. And for that quarterly report record to exist, we also had to enter your previous budget. So your previous budget could be either the original one that you worked on when you created your grant proposal, where your team worked on your grant proposal, or if you have modifications and adjustments to that budget, then we enter that. So the latest version that we had of your budget is the one that we enter. So that invoice component, that component that does all the calculations automatically based on your previous expenses, is working correctly for you when you start working on your new quarterly report. And also, I know you remember that we asked you to look at your logic models once we enter those. And the reason is because the second part, or the another part of the quarterly report, it's not so it's not only the invoices, it's the summary of activities as well. And the summary of activities is the one that asks you to report on tasks, outputs, and outcomes and your goals. So we wanted to make sure that we were listing and entering that information correctly, and we were establishing the connections in the right way for you. So when you do the report, it all makes sense to you and your program. So let's go ahead and start. Let's create. I am going to create the next quarterly report. In my case, it's going to be the July 1st to September 30th report. For you, it will be the one that you'll be working at this moment. To create a new quarterly report, you're going to click on New, and this view is going to open up for you. The first step is going to be always check your contacts. as this red note says up here. Make sure that your principal investigator, your ground financial contact, all those are correctly listed. Some roles change, some positions change. So if that is the case for your program, before you hit save in this form, go back to your institutional profile and check that information and update that information if it's necessary. So when you open this up, this information is pulling from the institutional profile in the correct way and is listing the correct numbers and the correct roles. Now we're going to enter the period of performance, which is, in my case, it's going to be, let's do October, December 2024. Let's see, October, December. So the best way to do this is, this is always my trick. I always do year, month, date, year, month, and date. So I'm going to find October date to December 2024. So year, month, date. Okay. Invoice number. This field is not required. Not everyone uses this field. So if you keep track in your organization on this invoice numbers, so go ahead. This is the field that we have created for you. Some of you used to do that in the spreadsheets. So if you have one, just go ahead and enter in here. You don't have to do it. It's not a required field, but I'm just entering something in there so you can see how it looks like. The agreement number is actually that number that gets assigned to the fully executed agreement once it's established between UCF and your institution. So we entered that information into your grant proposal from our end that it actually pulls into the invoices. So now we're going to go into the categories that we see in an invoice. These categories are exactly the same categories that we have in the budget. So you're going to invoice for each of those categories. You might not have funds allocated for all of them. That's fine. If you have no funds allocated, you're just going to see 0 for those years. You notice here that in my case, my example, I have a 2-year project. So I'm seeing amount for year 1 and amount for year 2, that it comes up to a total budget for personnel. So if you have a 3-year, then you're going to have an amount in year 3 additionally to the 2 that I have. And if you have a 4-year project, then you're going to have for amount allocated for year 3 and year 4 as well. The fields in here are exactly the same that you have in that spreadsheet, those columns in there. So you have expenses previously invoiced, total expenses this period, total expenses to date, and total balance remaining. The total expenses this period was the reason why we had to enter that previous invoice for you. So this that amount shown in here, but also for the system to do the calculations correctly, so it can go ahead with the formulas that calculate all this information for you. The total expenses this period is a field that is open for you to enter the information. So that's where you're going to put in how much is that you expend for personnel. So I am going just to enter a number here, and you can see how the total expenses today actually changed right there. It means that it's doing the calculations right there on site. So you don't even have to save it. It's right there. You should save it at the end. But what I'm saying is that you're going to see the changes and you're going to see the numbers change immediately. So it's going to calculate the total expenses today based on the expenses previously invoiced, and the total expenses this period is going to add up those two, and it's going to give you the total expenses today as a total amount. Then the total balance remaining is also going to be updated. It's going to be updated based on the total expenses today and the total budget for your category. Then you're going to do exactly the same process for all the categories. You're going to go through the fringe benefits, and you're going to enter how much is it that you expend in the fringe benefits. Then we're going to do the same for travel. In my case, for example, I am in year 1 of my project. I'm just creating my second invoice. I'm doing quarter 2 of year 1. I don't have any funds allocated in travel, meaning that I should not invoice anything in here. But if I do that by mistake, we're going to actually put that there so you can you see what happened later when I hit save. If I come to supplies and if I have some invoices in supply, I will enter it right here where it says total expenses this period. If I don't have expenses in supply, um, I just will enter 0, and that is okay as well. If you don't have expenses for that category for that quarter, that's fine. You just go ahead and enter 0 as you used to do when you were using the Excel file template. There is a note in here, and this is very important to stop for a few seconds and go through what this actually means. So it says, please invoice here expenses corresponding to individual equipment items with a cost lower than $5,000. So the supplies category, it's going to include those individual equipment items that cost less than $5,000. The equipment category, which is the next category, only includes individual items that are greater than $5,000. Meaning that if you bought a computer, a laptop, and it was $900, your invoices are going to be allocated in supplies. If you bought a piece of equipment that it is greater than 5,000, you invoice that amount in the equipment category. So that is important to keep in mind. We made sure that when we were entering your budgets, we looked at these categories carefully. The important note in here is that any individual expenses related to equipment that is lower than $5,000 is done, it's invoiced in supply. If it's greater than $5,000, then it goes in equipment. In my example, I don't have expenses on equipment because in my example, I don't have um, equipment funds allocated for items that are greater than $5,000. But if I was in that case, I would have to invoice those expenses under equipment. So in my case, I don't have any expenses in supplies, so I'm going to move on to equipment. As I said, I don't have any funds allocated in there. I don't have to invoice anything in there. Then we have consulting. I'm in year 1. I don't have any expenses allocated in it. I already have an example that I'm going to show you what happened if you, by accident, you do enter expenses in here when you don't have anything allocated for the year for that category. But this is another good note. Let's say that you need to use some funds of year 2 from your consulting allocated funds in year 1. What needs to happen is that you need to submit an adjustment before you do the invoice. Similar example to what we were discussing earlier. That means that you need to submit an adjustment, and that needs to happen before, because if you're going to invoice expenses for consulting year 1, you're going to get an error here. You're not going to, and that's actually what's going to happen. You're going to get an error that says you don't have funds allocated for year 1 for consulting. You need to contact FCSUA to make an adjustment. So what you will do is you can talk to us about it, and to learn how to do the modifications and adjustment process here in the FCSUA community. There is a separate demo for that. In my case, I am not going to invoice anything in there, and I'm going to move on to subcontracts. This is one that I want to stop also because this category is a little bit different than the others. In the others, I had only one field to enter the total expenses this period. In this case, I have two. And the reason why I have two is because the subcontracts is treated differently when we're calculating the modified total direct cost. So if you have a subcontract in your budget, which total is greater than 25,000, then that is subtracted from the direct cost, from the total direct cost, to calculate the modified direct cost. right? So in that same way, that is treated here in the invoicing part. So we need to know separately. We need to know separately the expenses if you have that subcontract that is over 25,000. If you are in that situation and you have some expenses for that subcontract, those expenses go down here in the second field. If you are invoicing in the subcontract that has a total amount over less than 25,000, then those expenses go up here. So that is an important note to put out there. So you need to think about and look at those as separate amounts. Like they cannot be added as a whole for this category. So they should go separate. In my case, I don't have any funds allocated for subcontract, so I'm going to do 0 here. And then we move on to other. So other is actually a bit similar to the subcontracts. You are also seeing that we have two open fields in there. That is, the reason for that is because the tuition expenses, the funds that are allocated for tuition are also not included in the calculations of the modified total direct cost. So those are subtracted from the total direct cost. So again, that applies to the invoicing piece. So we need to know separately how much are the expenses in tuition. So we can subtract them from the total direct cost. That's why we have two separate fields. So we have tuition expenses and tuition different and expenses different from tuition that are allocated under the other category. In my case, I have $5 allocated for year one. So let's say that I'm going to do $2 here, and I don't have expenses that are not related to tuition. So that should be it for the sections that comes after, which is total direct cost, modified direct cost. They're actually calculated for us based on the formulas that we know. You can see that this add up all the expenses for every category, including the $2 that I have for tuition. And when I go to modify direct cost, it actually not including the $2. So it's doing the work of calculating for you correctly this important piece, which is that modified total direct cost. Then we come down to the F&A cost. The F&A cost, as you know, is subject to that percentage that you enter in your budget or in your modification or adjustment. Whatever is the latest version of your budget and whatever is the percentage that you indicated there is what's going to be utilizing here. So keep that in mind. I know there are some institutions where that F&A rate changes yearly. That means you have to do an adjustment to update that percentage, because if you don't do that, then your invoices are not going to be using the correct percentage. So that is something that probably you have to do. I think it's yearly that those percentage change. So you know that every year before you start doing your invoices for the year, you have to come in and do an adjustment. So you enter that new percentage that's going to be that's going to apply to the F&A cost calculation. In this case, I think I had 10%, obviously, here. So it calculates the percentage for me. It gives me the total, and then it adds up everything in the total project cost. It shows me how much I had allocated for both years of my project, the previous expenses, how much is the total expenses this period, how much is today based on this two, and the balance remaining based on my total budget. Let's see. So I do have an additional section in here, which is the additional document. So this is not required, but if you have any documents, supporting documents that you want to upload with your invoice, this is a place to put that in. Again, they're not required. You're not going to be stopped from submitting your quarterly report if you don't have any documents uploaded. It's just an additional piece in there for you if you want to submit supporting documents. That's what you do. So let me go ahead and hit save so you see we're going to get an error as we expected. So it's telling me that I went over the $0 that I had allocated for travel. So I am going to go back to travel, and let me actually do one more. Let me hit this save one more time. It says, please communicate with FCSUA to submit a budget adjustment. It's telling you to go in and go in the modifications and adjustment component. Talk to us, let us know, hey, I need to move funds around. So let's go back to travel to see what we have done there. So that's exactly what happened. So we, as I said, we are in year one. We didn't allocate funds for travel in year one, and now we're invoicing $200. It's giving us an error. If you needed those funds, that amount to be in here, you should have done an adjustment before. So that's what the community is telling you in that error. Go ahead and do an adjustment. Talk to us. Let us know you're doing that adjustment so you can move funds maybe from the same travel category or maybe from another category. You can do that before you can submit this invoice. So that is an important piece right there. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to hit 0. So so we don't get the error anymore, and we can go ahead and save it. But that you see right there, that you just saw right there with travel, it's going to happen with every category. Same thing if you expend more than what you have allocated for total budget. Let's say that you're going over your total budget for travel. It's going to tell you the same error. It's going to tell you, no, you're over. You need to do an adjustment. You need to move funds from a different category to that category so you can invoice. It's the same principle, but it's checking so you don't make mistakes, and we don't have to be just going back and trying to track what happened. Why are this much difference between that invoice and that other invoice? And that's why we have all those processes in place. Okay, so now I'm going to go down and I'm going to go ahead and save it. So when I save it, and this actually goes back to that coordination that I was talking about, if more than one person is working on this report. If I close this now, I have not done the summary of activities yet. Let's say that I only the person that does the financial part. I just save it and I can close it. So I went ahead and save it, and I am back into the list. So I see now that a new invoice has been created, have a new record, and it's been saved as a draft, meaning that it stays with you in case that you have to work on other updates, other changes, or to tell the person that works in the summary of activities piece, hey, I'm done with the financial part, or I'm done for the day. You can go ahead and work on the summary of activities. I have to wait on other information. I cannot work on that for now, so I need to wait for a little bit. You can go ahead and work on the summary of activities. So that person can log in and do the reporting piece that correspond to the summary of activities. As you can see, what I did is I went in and I just hit the pencil. You can see that in this case, both are open. As I always like to mention, the action column is very important. When you click on view, you only get to see the data. You don't get to edit anything. So you see that the total expenses this period field now is blocked. So I cannot change that information. So if I go back and if I click in the pencil, which is the edit, that field now is open. So I can change anything in there. So that is all about the invoices. So you can see that. Let's move on to the summary of activities now. I am going to click on here. And the nice thing is, as I said, you all went through the logic model revision process. You all check all that information. What this is doing, and again, I am just pulling examples in here. There are goals from different programs. So anything in here that you see is like a one grant proposal. I just pull pieces from different grant proposals. So I'm seeing goals from FIU, but probably the outputs and the outcomes are different. So I just want to show you the mechanics, not really the content. The content is up to you and is specific to your grant proposal. So the first thing that you're going to see in your summary of activities is your goals. It's going to pull the goals that you have in your logic model. So you know this is what I wrote. These are the goals that I set up for my grant. You know you have a limit of 5. So in this case, I pulled three goals in here. So it will pull your goals, and then it will pull activities, outputs, and outcomes related to that logic model and to each of those goals. So if I go, for example, into activities, which is the first step, it's going to tell you for this goal, FIU Embrace Education, I listed a set of activities. What's going to happen is that for your first time doing a summary of activities report, this is going to be empty. So it is not going to have information because it's the first time you do it. It's going to pull every single activity output and outcome that you listed in your logic model. As you advance through your project and you start reporting, the good thing is that this is going to copy from the previous report. So you don't have to start every quarter from scratch in this. The reason why we did this is because there is a lot of writing. Sometimes maybe what you do is we know that you can utilize the language that you have in the previous quarter and maybe edit or just expand on your reporting. Um, so that is a nice feature there for you to take advantage. It will flow. It will come in when you create your quarter report. Because now is your first time, it's going to be empty. So you're going to start fresh in this case, but from that moment on, when you do the next quarter, it is going to pull from the previous one. Another nice addition to it is that it is only going to show the ones that have been not achieved. Let's say that you came in here this quarter and you said site supervisor training was achieved. Yes. Next quarter, you're not going to see it. You already achieved that task. You already achieved that outcome or that output. There's no need for you to report on it anymore, unless it's an ongoing thing and you decide not to close it completely. Maybe if you achieve everything that you wanted for the quarter, you say, no, continue working towards the activity because it's something that is an ongoing process. So it depends on how you are handling. That is up to you. It's up to your program and how your all this structure is set up for your FPCTP. But if you say yes, and you wrote here everything that you've done to complete that activity, when you do the next quarter, this activity is not going to show. That applies to outputs, outcomes as well. It's kind of like cleaning up your form. So you only report on what is left. That means that if you have indicated no continued work towards activity or no revising activity, you're going to see it. If you say yes, then you're not going to see the activity, the output, or the outcome. This is a very similar, so they all look the same. So you're going to have the goal, the activity, you're going to say, you're going to indicate the status, and you're going to describe your progress towards, or if you have any changes, that's going to happen and it's going to pull. In my case, in my example, I only have 2 activities in there. Then you can move on to the outputs. It is very similar. So you say yes, not continuing, not revising, and you explain. So now let's move on towards the outcomes reporting. And this one is a little bit different. So if you remember in your logic model, you set up 3 different sets of outcomes. You set up short-term, intermediate, and long-term. During the quarterly reports, we don't require you to report on the long-term outcomes. You only report about the long-term outcomes during the annual and final performance reports. So when you go here into the outcomes reporting section, you're only going to see short-term and intermediates. The structure is very similar. In this case, we ask a little bit more questions, but it lists the goal and we list the outcome where that goal is related to. We'd ask you to describe your results. You interpret your data. What is your progress towards the outcome? So this is very similar to what I mentioned and explained during the task. So during the activities, I'm connecting to the planning tool. during the activities and the output section. If you say no progress towards the outcome or some progress, then when you do your next quarterly report, this outcome is going to show up again. So you update us on the status. If you say outcome achieved, that is it. You don't see it anymore. You achieved the outcome already. You actually see that some questions actually went away because you already achieved the outcome. So there's no follow-up questions to this status. So if we change it actually back to no progress, we said describe any changes. Maybe there are reasons for you to not have the outcome achieved at this point, and we want to know about that. Then how will you move forward with this outcome? So what will you be doing? So will you continue working towards, or are you going to revise it because maybe it's not the way that you're trying to achieve and to work on it is not the right way? So maybe that's what you're going to do. You're going to revisit it in your next reporting cycle to see what is it that you can do differently to actually achieve your outcome and, of course, your goal. As I was mentioning, then we're listing the intermediate terms outcomes. So that's another set. So very similar structure. You indicate, in this case, I just have one in my example. So you go ahead and answer all the questions. Same thing, it applies. Now that these are intermediate, you also have to indicate the status. If it's achieved, it doesn't show. And if you say no progress or some progress, it will show the next quarter. And you will expand on it down here in questions D and E if you have not achieved the outcome. As I was mentioning, you can go ahead and save this. Let's say that you worked on this for a little bit, but we know there is a little bit of narrative that you have to enter, so you might not get through the entire summary of activity reports at once. So maybe you go ahead and save it and you're done for the day. So next day you want to come back and you go ahead and keep working on it. It actually takes you to the invoice, but that's okay. You go ahead and click on summary of activities, and then you can see all that information that you had in there before. Once you're ready, then is when you hit submit. Once you hit submit, what happened is that it comes to us. So we get a notification. You get a notification, an email that says that you have submitted the quarterly report for our revision. When we do that, we hit, and it actually blocks the edit functionality because we don't want you to still be working on it and we are revising your report and maybe you have some changes for it. So it locks the record, we get the email, we go through it, and if we have some comments, and actually I'm going to do that here on my admin side and very quickly, is I am going to put in some comments in there so you can see. And actually it applies to both sides. So it's not only for the summary of activities. I am going to show you comments also in the invoice piece. So what we're going to do is we are going to revise your invoice. We're going to provide comments, any comments that are needed. There's a section there for comments, and you are going to see the comments section only if there's data in it. So if you don't see anything on your invoice related to, you don't see anything in the sections, in the comments section, it means that everything is good. You don't have to worry. So same thing with the summary of activities. So once that's done, so we go through both steps. And if there's some comments in there, we send it back to you. We send it back to you as updates needed. And you get an email. You get a notification email saying your quarterly report needs attention. So you have to go back to it. So now I have done that from my end. So I'm going to refresh here. So you see that this actually is going to change. So this status changed. So now the pencil is back on. So I can go back in there and I can go through my invoice and I see actually they are shown in a different color. So it's easier for you to find them. So it says And again, this is just an example. It says, please revise your expenses this period and consider whether an adjustment is needed before the next quarter. So this is how it is going to look, exactly like that. So you can go through them. If they're not, see if there are no comments, they're not comments. So contracts, for example, there's not even a comment section in there. So you're only going to see a comment section when there is an area for you to look at. Similarly, we can actually do the same, go through the same revision process with the summary of activities. So I am going to go here in the summary of activities. I see, please expand on your description. So again, it's blue, same format, so you know where to look for. There are no other comments. If in this case, for example, there are comments for that activity, so you don't see the comment section, and exactly the same in outputs. In outcomes, if that is the case, of comments in that section. So you can go ahead and, I don't know, change it here. We are working on this and will provide updates next quarter. Once you're done with that, you go through the same submission process and you hit submit. You send it back to us. Close it. It logs it back. And it comes to us. We revise it. If we're fine with it, what we do is we approve it. You get a notification email. We do too. Then we come here and we refresh. It says final approval granted. So in that moment, this is done. You're done with your quarterly report. It has your approval date, when it was the date that the status changed, and it's locked. So from that point on, you can only see the data that you enter, but you cannot edit anything else. We still, of course, have access to it from the back if something happens. And if you realize that it's something that needs to be changed, my advice is that you can ask us to do that. We can do that, but my advice is do it before you have another quarter, because all these records are connected. Therefore, when I create quarter 3 here of year 1, it is going to pull from this. So if you have changes to quarter 2, something that you for some reason missed and you wanted to report, maybe some sort of activity that it was completed and you said that it was not, I will say go ahead and let us know so we can work on it and update this record, the last record that you have, the latest one that's in there, before the next one comes up. So your data is as clean as possible. So this is, I think, pretty much it about quarterly reports. This is going to grow, and it's another thing that I do like about this. This is going to grow. You are going to have 4 invoices per year. So that's why we actually added some sort of filter in here. So it's based on the financial starting year. So let's say that you want to see all your invoices for 2022. That's our 22-23 fiscal year. So you enter 2022. In my case, I don't have anything for 2022 because my projects start 2024 to 2026. So as you can see, if I enter 2022, it's not showing any records. If I do 2025, it's not going to show because it's the starting year. My starting year is 2024. So both records stay in there. So this is some additional resources for you to navigate through this list once this starts growing, so you can find things and go back to them if you need them very quickly. And I will say that a final note will be, as I mentioned usually, is there are a lot of capabilities that we do have with reporting now that we have the FCSUA community complete. I would say that is very complete in terms of like business functions related to the programs, to the FPCTP. So we can run reports and they don't take a lot of time. I can just let me know if you need something and you need a massive report and you don't have access to that data for some reason, just let us know. I can run a report and send you the information that you need. So that is something to also keep in mind. We are here to help and to assist. So that's another thing that I wanted to mention. Um, so let us know if you have any questions, if you have any feedback. This is going to keep improving. Anything that we find that can be done in the different way that can be done better, we will correct it. But if you have specific feedback, things that you would like to see that will make it more user friendly, please let us know. We're always like looking for user feedback because that's the best way to test this and to improve this platform.